Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about Kimetsu no Yaiba chapter... Actually, what chapter is it? 186, Ancient Memories. Alright, so I think first off, the first thing I really want to say is that it is really funny that we are getting a flashback within someone's dream. That's funny, and it also just, as I'm going through the chapter, it just really makes me appreciate how far we have to go to actually be able to get the backstory from the first guy. Like we need to make a lot of leaps here, right? Like we need to go into like genetic memory. We need to have this specific moment in time where this one other guy was willing to tell a story specifically to Tanjiro's ancestors. Like a lot of things had to go right here to make this work. The good thing though with Kimetsu no Yaiba is that this is not coming out of nowhere. I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate as we're looking at the chapter is that we know this has happened before. We know that Tanjiro has gotten those glimpses before. So this is one of those cases where the story did really well in setting us up for this because, you know, honestly, when it comes down to it, it is good to know what happened in the past. The issue is always going to be the mechanism by which we found out what's happening in the past. This is definitely one of the more heavy-handed ways of doing it. But when you have a series that is steeped in the paranormal, where the afterlife is a very real thing, when you have a series that spent time building up that genetic memory was a thing, you know, this isn't weird or outlandish. This doesn't break the suspension of disbelief here, because again, the series did its proper work in building that up. So when you're doing this, you know, you appreciate how crazy or how hard the story had to warp to do it, but you also know like it's within the cosmology. And you know, that's just what I have in the back of my head as I'm going into that chapter. It's really funny when you take that step back to just think about it. Anyway, for this chapter, it is well, what would you even call it? An information dump chapter. It's pretty much information dump. Like the writer is just making sure that we understand everything about all of the involved parties here. And hey, the first meeting between Yoriichi and Muzan, I'm all for it. So, you know, my general, you know, in terms of the information that we got here, I liked how it humanized Yoriichi. It was more than I expected. I really thought, well, when you look at his brother's perspective, the guy seems very inhuman. But when you look at this guy's perspective, it's like, well, no, we know that he cared about people a lot as a child. But in this case, you know, it went that whole other step. One thing that I'm feeling as I'm reading this is that really Yoriichi and Tanjiro were pretty much cyclical in the sense of how they came across Muzan. They both left their home, and then Muzan came and attacked during that one time. Or, you know, Muzan's forces. It's really interesting, the little parallels and little connections between them. And again, you know, I really appreciated seeing more human sides to Yoriichi during all of this. It's going to be very interesting to see how his confrontation with Muzan goes down. We know that Muzan will get put to a point where he's close to death, but he's not going to die. It's really interesting. Okay, so let's do the page-by-page walkthrough. Okay, so the first page was the establishing page. It's just that page where that little girl is saying Papa to Tanjiro as he's in the memories. So that was actually a pretty good construction on the page, because if you're reading the page in the order it's intended to be read, you know, you would be as confused as Tanjiro until you get to see the little girl there, and that really establishes things that, okay, we're in a different time period, and that little girl's already the little hint that this is a different memory from the one that Tanjiro has seen before. Anyway, from that first section, we go into a strange transitionary section that involves, what was his name again? Murata, as he's trying to resuscitate Tanjiro. Now, it was really interesting that they chose to just squish that there and not put it at the beginning of the page. It does kind of break up the chapter a little bit. It breaks up the flow of the chapter. When you go back to the flashback, it seems like, you know, that became the transition to how Tanjiro is sitting on the porch now. It was an interesting move. I wonder what was the rationale between how they positioned it the way they did. Regardless, that transitionary portion really just tells us one big thing, that Yushiro is out in the open and he is under rubble, and that maybe he could help Tanjiro. And I think that's a really great move. And now when you look at the end of the chapter and you know that Tamayo was in the memory, maybe Tanjiro can give him one last little piece of solace, like, hey, I saw the first time that Tamayo was able to get away from Muzan. I feel like her presence in the flashback is a nice little addition to what we previously got, and maybe we're gonna get something really cool out of it. Maybe this is the moment where she is able to get away. Any Hoosers, we go back into the main thing, and we see the mechanics of how this thing is working. It is legitimately a memory. They're not pulling any kind of shenanigans here. So I really enjoyed that, how when Tanjiro wanted to ask about the 13th form, they just, the readers were clued in, as well as Tanjiro, that he doesn't have control of the body, so he's watching a memory play out. What's really good though is that Tanjiro has his mental faculties throughout all of this, so he can listen to the information and come up with his own ideas, and he can make conclusions based on the information that he's hearing, and that he's not in a dream state. It's actually really good. It's good that he's not just going with the flow of the dream. Although that does make me question, since he is in a dream and the dream is playing out, it's really odd that Tanjiro, when he first came into the memory, he couldn't smell anything. And if it is a memory, then it's either like the memory has degraded such that the smell isn't being registered, or it could very well be something like Tanjiro's ancestor doesn't have a sense of smell. Honestly, the sense of smell is the weird part. The sense of smell in the previous chapter made it feel like, okay, that tells you this is an otherworldly place. But now in this chapter, knowing that it's a full memory, I wonder how that bit of the smell like plays into it. There's not really any cues here to tell us how detailed the memory is. Like, the memory looks like a regular place. Anyway, as we're going through that page, I think this is page 6 and 7 on Viz Media. We have the nice little talk with Yoriichi, and we find out that, Yoriichi is the kind of person that likes seeing other people happy. So really, this begins just telling us that Yoriichi really cares about people. And his words throughout the chapter do have a lot of weight to it. I mean, there is a certain level of appreciation that's had when you have a character saying that the world is very beautiful and it's a blessing to be born into it. I very much agree with that sentiment, and so that they did a really good job painting this character out. And so when you have that setup there, where he seems like he's like a Buddha at the beginning, and then you find out about the rest of his life, it really adds to, like, this was legitimately a pure existence. And it was also very interesting how he didn't just go straight to combat when he got out into the wide world. How this was just something that happened as a natural cause and effect to Muzan's existence. Anyway, we move on and we start the flashback proper. There's a lot of really cool things coming out of that flashback for page 8 on Viz. You find out that his mother was praying to the sun god religiously, praying for Strife to be disappearing, and we also find the origin of where the earrings came from. That was really cool, and it is really cool also to see how they are so worried about him having these qualities that he now has as an adult, like the deaf ears and his inability to speak, or he never speaks. Anyway, we see his perspective, and it's really just nice the whole way throughout. I really can't understate how nice it is to hear his perspective in all of this, how he still looks at his brother in kindness, how he interpreted everything going on around him. Anyway, we move on, and beyond just the bit of the story where he was in the household, we go out into the wide world, and we find out, he was running for a day and a night. He found this girl. Her name was Uta, I believe. I'll spot it again. He found a girl about his age. And this little girl was also having her own little lesson about letting go of things and, she was exercising kindness. She struggled a little bit. She had her moment, but then she exercised kindness. Really, that was a really nice meeting between the two. I also really enjoyed how he questioned her all the way throughout. Because it just, like, when you saw that, it made you feel like, oh, this is a really nice connection. So, I was really surprised when the story just said that it escalated from there, that he just decided to live together with her. That was really cute. I think that was a really good way of bringing it about, and it was ultimately a very earnest type of it was a very earnest interaction between the two of them. You know, when I'm looking at that page of Uta crying, he mentions that her eyes were like obsidian, and you know, I hear that and I wonder, well, that is that an important detail? Well, from his perspective, you know, he noticed. When I look at it as a moment of Yorichi expressing some kind of awareness of another person. You know, when you note that her eyes are like obsidian, and that's like a detail that you keep in your story, you could already tell that there was some degree of fondness within that. So I think that was also like a really good move in choosing to describe that little portion. Anyway, as we go beyond that page, we start developing a few more things for the character. One thing that I really liked here is that he said that Uta had a habit of talking from morning until evening. And the way that that is worded, calling it a habit, you know, you could kind of hear like the little funny jab in there. So I feel like when the kid met her, when you look at the way he described his parents and all of that, and then you look at the subtle changes with Uta, I feel like this was his journey of becoming more like a human. And then you go into the rest of the page and you see, well, thanks to her, he learned that people see the world in different ways. So quite literally, thanks to this girl, he did, maybe to some degree, learn how to interact with people better. So that was really good on him. I mean, there's a lot of things that can really be taken away here. Like she is legitimately the first person that he's really spoken to at length here. So it was really interesting in the story to see how he changed once he got outside of those walls. And it was really interesting to see how this girl made a difference in him. And you know, like you know, you read the chapter, you know that this was supposed to be building up, that they were it was a big deal for him, especially with the line that she, what was it? A kite whose string had broken. That was a really, that was a really nice line. Although I would never have thought of Yorichi as a kite who had his string broken, because he seemed like he was a guy in control. Mind you, this whole chapter was showing you about the vulnerabilities within the character. Anyway, you then go into the next page and you find out, well, they were married, and it was like, okay, yeah, good. And again, for me, I was not expecting it because I know this guy as the warrior, so I didn't expect that this would be how it would go. So that was a really nice surprise, and I like how that was hidden behind a page that you couldn't just see it. It was a page turner for that one. Any Hoosers, pages 14 to 15 are just the pages of tragedy, just telling the story of how he left his house one day, how he went to help someone, how by the time he came back, someone had killed both Uta and a child, and that sucked. That was a really sad moment. It showed you that in him doing his kindness, he might have been too late to go and save his wife, like the one person that held his string down. So there was a significant tragedy in that, and you can see the parallels or the echoes to Tanjiro's event there. Anyway, we go to page 16 and 17, and these are pretty much the pages of, you know, the life that he could have had dashed by the demon. The things that I really enjoyed here were like that he was, for 10 days and nights, he was cradling their bodies, most likely using a breath to be able to manage that. We have that little blurb where he said his dream was to live a quiet life. And honestly, that was another good move. When you put in what could have been, the best way to accentuate a tragedy is to think about the what ifs. That's why tragedies are usually set up such that there is a promise that is done before the tragic moment, and then the tragic moment occurs, and then that promise is never completed. When you have expectations of the future and it's cut short, that does enhance the tragedy here. In this case, hearing him say it himself, that his dream was to live a quiet life, that again does accentuate what was going on. Anyway, that little bit about being close enough to reach out and take their hands, that really puts the nail in the coffin of just how sad this whole situation was, when these are very earnest wants, and that he couldn't even have something so simple. Anyway, by page 17, we start up the how the Demon Slayers became more powerful. As we find out here, the Demon Slayers were already pre-established, but Yorichi came in and taught them the form of breath. So what I found most interesting when they're talking about the Demon Slayers is that the forms already existed. They already had the forms of flame, wind, water, thunder, and stone. And then what's interesting there is that I believe that Rengoku's father said that the sun breath was the original breath from which all the other breaths came from. Although in this case, there is something a little bit different going on here. In this case, it's implied, like, well, you see it, like the forms existed first. So now there is a difference between the forms and the breath itself. The breath of fire breathing, for instance, you could still say it came from sun breath, but it's just the order by which it came. It's just like the order. Like Yoriichi has a lot of capabilities that probably the rest of the swordsmen don't have, like being able to see the invisible world. So in a sense, given that he is the one giving the breath to everyone, you could say that his is the original breath, but there's a little bit more wrinkles to the story, and I really appreciate that. You know, it's cool that the flame, wind, water, thunder, stone, like all those different forms existed before the breath got involved. And I really like this because it tells you that Yoriichi wasn't just like the progenitor of all of this. He came in and helped improve something that had already existed before him. It really makes you feel that sense of, you know, legacy. It makes you feel that sense of progression. These guys were entirely a team. These guys, you know, you could say that Yoriichi could have legitimately have done it all by himself, but it's really cool to see that he came in when they were already had some kind of foundation to build off on. When the chapter makes the point to note the swordsmen called the Hashira were already superior, that's really important because it tells you like these people were already struggling about. They just needed that moment of sudden development, and Yoriichi is pretty much the one that provided that for them. So I do like how the story frames it, that you don't really feel like these people were less equal than Yoriichi. You feel like they were people who were already on the thing, and Yoriichi could come in and help them improve. Really good stuff. I think that's probably my favorite part of the chapter, in all honesty. Just the exact ordering of when the breaths came about and how the forms already existed before that. Anyhoosers, by the end of the chapter, you have the guy saying that he was born for the purpose of defeating Muzan, and honestly, when you see how this went, it's like, yeah, probably you were born into a life where your mother prayed to the sun god and tried to, well, heal you. You came into a life where you could see the invisible world. Yeah, I think this was definitely machinations of fate. No other way around it. And I hope you know, it's really interesting that Muzan's problems have come from people that he just left alive, or he just neglected to kill, or he managed to kill their family while they were out. Mind you, I think he does it all the time, so it's not a really good thing of like, Muzan should learn to not just attack people when one of the family members is gone. I'm sure he does it all the time, and I'm sure it's only come back to bite him like, what, twice? Anyway, sorry, I had a phone call. Anyhoosers, overall, for Kimetsu 186, I think that was a beautiful chapter. I love how much they humanized Yoriichi. I think that was really good. I'm excited to see the next chapter and how this goes. I really do think this is going to be the moment that Tamayo breaks free of the guy, but we'll have to see. Regardless, everyone, let me know what you thought down below. Did you enjoy the chapter? Did you get sad? I feel really, I felt for the character. I think they did a really good job with making this chapter. Anyway, let's call it there, everyone. I got nothing else to say. It was a beautiful chapter. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.